They were men and women who found favor with God, some with abounding faith, others redeemed, but all Bible heroes after God's own heart.
Saul was a vigorous defender of the Jewish faith, persecuting the early followers of Jesus. But it was an incident on the road to Damascus where the scales figuratively and literally fell from his eyes. Now called Paul, he traveled the known world, spreading the gospel, making friends and enemies. Today, half of the books we know as the New Testament are attributed to Paul, an evangelist, a martyr, a Bible hero.
I don't know about you, but I have been loving this Bible Heroes series that we are in. We've got to talk about some Bible heroes like David, like Moses. Last week we talked about Peter, and this week we're talking about Paul, and next week we're talking about Mary Magdalene. And so if you're connecting here, we're talking about Peter, Paul, and Mary over a 3-week series. Oh, sorry, that's the wrong Peter, Paul, and Mary. There we go. We're talking about Peter, Paul, and Mary, and this week we get to dig into Paul. And I'm telling you this, we could spend 3 years of sermons just on Paul. So I got like 30 minutes. We're going to do the highlights, okay? We're going to get into the main things that we need to know about Paul. But here's the first thing that we need to understand. We're in this series, right? Bible heroes after God's own heart. And Paul sort of falls into like 2 categories for us. He's in the hero and villain category, because his life does not start out being someone that is trying to promote Christianity. He starts out actually in the opposite direction. In fact, when it came to the first martyr for the faith, Stephen, who was preaching the gospel, and the Pharisees said that he needed to be killed for what he was saying about Jesus, Saul was right there. Paul's name originally was Saul, named after the first king of Israel. Saul was right there and approved of this killing because he saw the Christian way as a threat, as something that needed to be stamped out. He was very much against it, and so he approved of the killing of Stephen. In fact, as we heard Sandy read there in that passage in his letter to the Galatians, he said, I violently persecuted God's church. I did my absolute best to destroy it. That is who Saul is when we encounter him the first time here in Scripture. And the thing is, he's a Pharisee. He will call himself at one point a Pharisee of Pharisees. He said, my zeal for the law was unmatched. I was going to make sure we crossed every T and we dotted every I when it came to the law. And he had his own Bible heroes that he followed. He followed Moses, Abraham, but he also was a big fan of the prophet Elijah. And Elijah was this prophet, a mighty prophet who went after the corruption, went after the things that he felt were going to go against the faith. In fact, he has this big showdown on Mount Carmel with the prophets of Baal, this false god. And in that, he calls down fire from heaven to burn up the offering, to show the power of God. And this is what Saul felt was needed, that fire needed to come down on these Christians and show the power of God, because he believed that it was such a wrong way to go. And so after the killing of Stephen, Saul is asking the other Pharisees for permission. He says, there's this place down the road about 150 miles, Damascus, and it's just this place where everybody comes through, and Christianity is growing rapidly there, and we need to go put a stop to it. So they give him permission to go and persecute the Christians there. But on the road, he has an experience that changes everything. He has this transformational moment, and he sees this bright light, and it's so bright that he becomes blind. He can't see anything, and he starts to hear this voice, and this voice says, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? Someone who can't see, he's bewildered, and he's just got to respond, and he's like, who are you, Lord? And then he hears the last thing he expected to hear. I'm Jesus, the one you're persecuting, the one who you say didn't rise from the dead. And I'm talking to you right here and right now. The risen Lord. And this rocks Saul to his very core. And he is given instructions to go meet a man named Ananias. And Saul is trying to reconcile with the fact that he has been persecuting Christians, that he has thought this was the worst thing possible, and now he's just had an encounter with Jesus. How do I reconcile with that? Try to put yourself in Saul's shoes in that moment. Like, how do I deal with this? Well, we also have to put ourselves in Ananias' shoes, because the Lord appears to Ananias and says, I want you to go find this man Saul. He has been blinded, he can't see. You're going to pray for him so that he can see again, and he is going to start spreading the gospel. And Ananias, and if you've ever wondered, like, can I argue with God? Yes, a lot of people have in the Bible. They've given us a lot of good ways to show you how to do that. You can always argue with God. Now, he still may push you to say, like, come on, you can do this. And Ananias is like, God, are you really sure about this Saul guy? Like, you know what he's doing to us, right? He's killing us. He's literally killing us. And you want me to go help him? And then the Lord says something to Ananias, and I want you to put yourself in Ananias' shoes and hear these words. And like think, what would you have thought in this moment when God says this to you? That Saul, the one you know is killing you, well, Saul is my chosen. Everyone say chosen. Saul is my chosen instrument to take my message to the Gentiles, to the kings, and to the people of Israel. Oh my goodness. The guy that was killing us is now going to be the evangelist for us? He's the one that's going to go spread the word? And God says, yeah, he's seen the light. He's had this experience where he was blinded by my light, where he's heard my voice, and it's changed everything. I don't know what that was like for Saul/Paul, but I'm guessing it was at least something like this. Take a look.
And now, people, when I woke up this morning, I heard a disturbing sound. I said when I woke up this morning, I heard a disturbing sound. What I heard was a jingle-jangle of 1,000 lost souls. I'm talking about the soul of mortal men and women departed from this life. Wait a minute. Those lost, anguished souls roaming unseen over the earth, seeking a divine life. They'll not find because it's too late. Too late, yeah. Too late for them to ever see again the life they once chose not to follow. All right. Don't be lost when the time comes. For the day of the Lord cometh as a thief in the night. Yeah.
The band.
Do you see the light?
The band.
Do you see the light?
What light?
Have you seen the light?
Yes, I have seen the light.
Have you seen the light? It changes everything. And for Saul, it changed everything when he saw the light. Things happened to him that were unexplainable. He goes from being blinded to meeting with Ananias, being prayed over, and literally scales falling from his eyes so that he could see again. And within 3 days, he is preaching the good news of Jesus Christ in the synagogues. How does that happen? Well, he would tell it like this in his letter to the Galatians. He said, I received my message from no human source. No one taught me. Instead, I received it by direct revelation from Jesus Christ. And speaking as someone who went to seminary, and it cost me $60,000, I would have loved that version. Like, the Jesus seminary would have been great. That would have saved a lot of time and energy. But for Paul, in this moment, he has received something. And Jesus has called him directly into ministry. And again, just a few days later, he is in the synagogue preaching the good news. And here's the really crazy part of it. They start trying to debate him. And he has an answer for everything. They can't actually find a fault in anything he's saying. They can't debate him, so much so that they start plotting to kill him. And they have to escape to get him to safety because he just has it. He knows what to say because his life has been transformed by grace. It has been completely transformed. And whether you know it or not, yours has too. Your life has been transformed by the grace of Jesus Christ. And there are these moments that happen that we have to pay attention to where God is calling us into something new. And I want you to keep in mind when sometimes we have this inner argument with ourselves, like, I don't think God's calling me into that. Oh, he couldn't use me for that. He took the guy who was killing Christians and made him the greatest evangelist of all time for Christianity. If he can do that, I'm pretty sure he can do something with us, okay? So, let's not let that argument get in the way. There are these moments in time, these moments where God shows up. In the Greek, there's two words for time. There's this word chronos, and it's where we get chronological from, and it's just normal time that we think of. There's another kind of time, and it's called kairos. And kairos is this time where eternity, God's eternity, steps into time. It's where God shows up and he says, I'm calling you to something. I want you to see something and act on it. There's something new I want for you. And when these moments hit, we have a choice. God's a gentleman. He doesn't force anything on us. He doesn't say, you got to do this. You get to do this. And so when it comes, we have a choice to make. Do we take the step of faith and step into it? I promise you, you have experienced kairos moments, and you may be even experiencing one this week. So the question is, what do you do with it when they happen? What do you do when a kairos moment hits you, when God shows up with his eternal time, steps into our time? Well, there's actually a process that we follow. Take a look.
What do we do when we catch ourselves in the midst of what might be a kairos moment? How do we ensure that we don't miss this opportunity to learn, to change, and to grow? Any process of change starts with observation. Look at the entire moment and how it has impacted you. Of course, it's not enough to simply note that something significant has happened. We must then reflect on the different pieces of the event and look into the emotions that it conjures up. It's time to bring the internal conversation to the outside world. Good decisions are seldom made in complete isolation. Who are some wise and trusted voices you can invite into this process? Who can you discuss this with? Who loves you enough to hurt your feelings when necessary? People that know you and know God can offer valuable insight. This is the point when you transition from analyzation to action. Often, this can be the point where we get stuck. We love talking about things that are going on in our lives, but rarely actually take the necessary steps to do anything about them. God is challenging you to do something, to change the trajectory of your life. And before you act, you need a plan of action. Mine out what the invitation toward action is and figure out how you're going to take a step forward. What would it take for you to succeed? Identify those who can hold you accountable to take the necessary steps and invite them into the process. Finally, it's time to act. Follow through with the plan that you felt God calling you toward from the kairos moment. We can meander through life, experiencing it as it comes our way, or we can carefully watch for what God is doing around us and live intentionally and fully. God is the designer of life and defender of our joy. He has hope for us. He wants to see us reclaim and restore our life on this earth. Our challenge is to actively and intentionally search for the fingerprints that God leaves on our everyday lives.
So when these kairos moments hit, we have this thing that we have to do because we can get stuck. We might start talking about what it is, but to actually move into an action, to take a step of faith, can be difficult. But it's what Paul did. It's what David did. It's what Moses did. It's what Abraham did. When they met their kairos moments, they took that step of faith. And you have experienced them. So start to think about that. What are the kairos moments you have experienced? What are the things that you have started to think, man, I think God's trying to get my attention on something? But more importantly, what have you done to act on them? Have you taken that step of faith? I can start to think about moments in my life. There's been many kairos moments. Many moments where I thought, man, God is trying to get my attention. And I always wondered, like, are you sure, God, about this? It's okay to ask God those questions and to wrestle with it. Like when he said, all right, I want you to go from being a teacher at a high school to being a pastor. And so then a few years later, I find myself being ordained as a pastor. I'm like, really? This is the plan? And as I got to that, I had to wrestle with all of the things of a kairos moment. Didn't even know it. Like, I didn't know that I was going through that. But I observed that I had this calling that I was starting to experience from God. I had to reflect on, is this like a real thing? And so I start going around the circle, even though I didn't realize that's what I was doing. And I was like, all right, I got to talk to some people. You better believe, I was like, Pastor Mike, let's talk about this. Every pastor at Hope, let's talk about this. I want to find out if this is right. Okay, so this is something we should act on, then let's make a plan for it. I got to get into a seminary. I got to do this process. I got to learn the things I need to learn, to have the experiences I need to have some accountability folks in my life, and then actually act on it, and it starts to change your trajectory. I had another one recently. It was in February, and it was a moment where I realized, and God was trying to get my attention on it, that I wasn't going to be around much longer if I didn't act. That my health was deteriorating, it was not good, and that if I wanted to continue to be a pastor and live, that something had to happen. I wanted to also continue to love my family well and be there for them. Something was going to have to happen. I had started a weight loss journey a couple years ago, and it was going well, and then I had an injury that really set me back hard. And I kept trying to get back into it, but with the injury, I couldn't. And then I sort of got discouraged, and I gave up on it. And then my weight started to careen back up. And I realized, man, I got to do something or it's all over. And so starting in February, I got on a journey, and I have lost 60 pounds since then. You can give God praise for that, because it's definitely with his help. But in that journey, it took, again, taking this moment where God's getting your attention and saying, what you're doing is not good. I got a different path for you. And observing, I would like to live. I would like to continue to be doing what I'm doing and loving on my family and reflecting on that and what that means. Started discussing it with my family, with my doctors. We got to do something about this. So we came up with a plan, how to get there. And I entrusted some folks in this congregation and some folks in my family as accountability partners. And then we acted on it. That's how these kairos moments work, when God's trying to get your attention. Our country had one 248 years ago when the Declaration of Independence was signed, to say that this British Empire ruling over us is not a good thing. They went through the process. They observed that was not good. They reflected on what that meant. And then they discussed, what are we going to do about it? All right, well, we're going to make a plan. We're going to draw up this document. We're going to declare independence. We're going to hold each other accountable to it, so much so that we're going to put our names on it. And one of us is going to really put our name on it and make it really big. And we're going to say, this is who we are. And then we're going to act on it. And because of that, we live in a country where it is free and safe to come worship every day. It's safe for you to be here right now. You are free to do that. There is a Kairos moment. I didn't know about planning this message. In fact, it was this morning. I'm talking with Delaney, our new worship leader, and she said I could share this with you. She had gone through a rough spot in her faith. In fact, had stepped away from the church, and she had a lot of church hurt, and she was saying, I'm doing some things. She was teaching. She was working with some special needs adults, and it was not because she wanted to do this, but because the special needs adult that she was working with wanted to go to, of all things, our Kairos ministry at Iowa State. And so she was taking him to it. And there, God got a hold of her heart. At Kairos, she had her Kairos moment. I cannot make this up, okay? At Kairos, she has her Kairos moment. It draws her back to God. It draws her then into ministry, into becoming a worship leader, and now being the worship leader of Hope Grimes. And she wasn't even wanting to go. But when God gets a hold of you, when His eternal time steps into our time, and we take that step of faith to act on it, our lives change. Remember what happened to Paul. It's a 180 for Paul. It's a 180. And I think that sometimes we can think, oh, well, it just was so easy for Paul. I mean, he got the Jesus seminary, right? It was easy. He got that. And then he just started building churches. No, he didn't. So let's understand that timeline just a little bit. Paul has his experience on the road to Damascus with Jesus in 34 AD. He does not go on his first missionary journey until 48 AD, 14 years later. He is not trusted by some of the people in the Christian faith because they're like, well, we know what you were doing before. And so he had a hard time getting in with some people. He had to work through that. In fact, so much so that at one point they had to send him away to Tarsus, where he's from, and he was there for like 10 years. While he's there, he's preaching the gospel, that message that he's been given, and he starts writing letters. If you look, Tarsus is right there on the right side. Right above, you can see Galatia. Guess what the first letter he wrote was? Galatians. That's the first letter he wrote while he was in Tarsus. And he starts spreading the good news. He meets up with a man named Barnabas. The two of them start working together. They get called up to Antioch. And from there, they get commissioned to go out on a missionary journey. Their first journey was the path you see in red. It's a short journey. For that 1 year, they're starting churches. They're spreading the good news to people that they're coming in contact with. And they come back. Immediately upon returning, they're like, great job. Go on another one, and a bigger one this time. So the one you see in yellow is where they start again. And now it's a 4-year journey that they're going to go on. And in that time, they start going to some places we might start to recognize. Philippi, letter to the Philippians. Thessalonica, the letter to the Thessalonians. Corinth, the letter to the Corinthians. Ephesus, the letter to the Ephesians. These are the churches he's starting, and the churches that he is looking after and caring for, building up leaders in. As he's coming back to Jerusalem, they're bringing a special offering from some of those churches to help the church in Jerusalem that's struggling. And immediately upon getting there, he gets arrested. And there is a plot to kill him. So they have to move him from Jerusalem to Caesarea, where he'll spend 2 years in prison. And then he needs to go to Rome, and he has to take this long and winding road on the green path to get to Rome, which takes about 3 years, where then he'll spend another 2 years in prison there, preaching to the guards at the prison, preaching to anyone that would come near to listen. and then eventually freed in order to continue his work, to continue building churches until he would be martyred for the faith around 68 to 70 AD. So from 34 AD, when he encounters Christ, he has a good 24, 26 years of ministry that is happening over that time that he has been called into. He was quite the world traveler. He was all over the place. He was doing what God had called him to do. Now again, he's trying to kill Christians. And what he ends up doing is writing most of the New Testament. Everything in red he wrote. Everything in red. Galatians, Thessalonians, Corinthians, Romans, and so on. He wrote all of that. That leaves in the New Testament the Gospels and a couple of other letters. He wrote most of the New Testament. And I put Hebrews in pink because Hebrews doesn't have an author attached to it. But let's get real. If you read it, it reads like Paul. Everything about it reads like Paul, so I'm giving it to him. So he gets that one as well. So he writes a ton of stuff. He spreads the good news. You know, the Bible is still the #1 bestseller every week, all time. That's why they took it off the bestseller list. That message that he has is going out to the whole world. That message he has is continuing today, 2,000 years later. Because God got a hold of him, transformed his heart, and sent him on a new path. He answered the Kairos moment. And he stepped into it with faith. Because, as God said to Ananias, Saul is my chosen instrument. My chosen instrument to take my message to all these places. And here's what I want you to hear today. You are God's chosen instrument too. You are God's chosen instrument for fill in the blank. I don't know what it is for you right now. God will help reveal it. If you want to talk about it, I'm glad to meet with you on that. Andy's glad to meet with you on that. But you are God's chosen instrument for something. Maybe it's to be a great teacher. Maybe it's to be a great healthcare worker. Maybe it's to build something. Maybe it's to be a stay-at-home parent. I did that for 2 years. It was one of the hardest jobs I ever did. It was amazing. Maybe it's to pray. Maybe God's calling you to be his chosen instrument for something like really super specific, like maybe this.
He needs a strike. Burton needs a bolt. Swing and a miss. And for the first time, Rocky Top reaches the mountaintop of college baseball. They are the World Series champions.
I mean, come on, God's team had to win sometime, right? You know? And seriously, who took the under on me getting, or the over on me getting to the Vols winning the national championship 30 minutes into this message, right? Like it was going to happen. But maybe you're called to win a national championship. There's some young people in here. You never know. You might be called to do something like that. But whatever it is God's calling you to do, there's always a bigger purpose for it. And the thing that God typically calls us into, the thing that he called Paul into, the thing that he called Moses and Abraham and David and Peter and others into, the thing that he'll call you into is to serve. Paul will call himself a slave for Jesus Christ. That word slave also means servant. A servant of Jesus Christ. That we're called to serve. You're like, well, I don't know. How am I supposed to serve? I got an idea. That's a great way to start. I will tell you this. There are people that got dragged to serve at VBS. Like a spouse said, you're doing it. Somebody said, you're going to do this, or I really need you to do this. Fine, I'll go do it. And it ended up being their Kairos moment. It ended up being the moment where their heart was transformed. They didn't expect it. They thought they were showing up to help some kids get through a week. And everything changed for them. And it led to more and more and more. God calling them to a new path. Because see, God has gifted us all in such unique ways. He's given us all different gifts. Whether you know it or not, you are gifted. You are chosen. You are called. And one of the people that reminds us of that, guess who it is? Paul. In Romans, he says this, in His grace, God has given us different gifts for doing certain things well. So if God has given you the ability to prophesy, speak out with as much faith as God has given you. If your gift is serving others, serve them well. If you are a teacher, teach well. If your gift is to encourage others, be encouraging. If it is giving, give generously. If God has given you leadership ability, take the responsibility seriously. And if you have a gift for showing kindness to others, do it well. You are gifted. You are chosen. You are called. Will you take the step of faith? Meet the Kairos moment and actually step forward into the calling God has given you. Because the words that Paul says about himself, this realization he finally has, they apply to you too. As he said in his letter to the Galatians, even before I was born, God chose me and called me by His grace. Here's the truth, Hope. Even before you were born, God chose you and called you by His grace. Every single one of you. He has called you to something more. And so you have the opportunity to step into that. To meet the Kairos moment. Don't get stuck at the bottom of the circle. Don't just talk about it. God's calling you to something more. God is calling you to meet Him right where He is and to experience Him, just as we're going to do in this meal right here. Because we get to experience Christ right here and right now, His presence in this meal, because of His promise. Because it was in the night in which He was betrayed that our Lord Jesus took bread. He gave thanks and He broke it and He gave it to His disciples, saying, "Take and eat. This is my body given for you for the forgiveness of sins. Do this for the remembrance of me." Again, after supper, He took the cup. He gave thanks and He gave it to all to drink, saying, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood, shed for you and for all people for the forgiveness of sin. Do this for the remembrance of me." You get to encounter Christ in this meal. And encountering Christ is that Kairos moment we all need. It's the moment that all of us need to take that step of faith. So as we prepare to meet Him, let us follow Him in the words that He taught us to pray so long ago. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be Thy name. Thy kingdom come, Thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For Thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. I want to invite our communion servers forward. As they come forward to prepare this meal for you, our ushers will direct you to your station. When you come to the station, all you need to do is hold out your hand. They'll put the wafer in your hand. And then you can reach into the tray and grab either a cup with the dark-colored wine or the light-colored grape juice, whichever you need. If you need an allergy-free station, every one of our stations has those elements. Just let the servers know, and they'll be glad to assist you with those specially prepared elements. So as you come to meet Jesus, know this: all is ready. The table is set. It's time to come and eat.